please come up and introduce our program.
Thank you. Our speaker doesn't really need an introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. We have been working on this for almost 2 years, first with Tanner and now with Peyton. Peyton, thank you for making this happen through a variety of things, which is hard to do, but it's been 7 years and 2 weeks since Senator Lankford was last here, and we are excited to have him. I am delighted you're here. He is the senior senator from the state of Oklahoma, the Honorable James Lankford.
Sit down. Very kind of you and also unnecessary, so thank you. I'm laughing that it's been 7 years and 2 weeks on that, Kevin, so to be able to track that. My challenge is there are 77 counties in Oklahoma, and y'all actually pay me to be in D.C. most of the time, and so my responsibility is there more than it is here to be able to be home, so it's always nice to be able to be home. And this week was an interesting week because we were not scheduled to be there at all, and we were there part of the time anyway. So it's just kind of the nature of where things are right now. I want to just say great to see everybody. There's a lot of friends in this room and folks that I've known for a long time, and it's good to be able to see you. Glad the hip is working out to be able to do that. I do look forward to seeing you at the marathon next year, now that I've already heard the challenge has been dropped to your new bionic hip, and to be able to do that. But it's great to be able to see so many familiar faces and friends that are here. Quick family update I want to just be able to tell you, because a lot of us have known each other for a long time. Oldest daughter, Hannah, is now 27. Youngest daughter is now 24. So I know your own kids get older, but everyone else's kids stays the same age. I want to just tell you those two little girls are now, up. And looking for godly boys, so if you know any around, we're still working on that side of things as well. So let me just talk a couple of things in D.C., and let me just back up this week. And what I'd love to be able to do is to be able to just open this up to questions as well. But I want to give you a couple updates because there's just a lot that's happening. What is remarkable to me is the amount of social media misinformation noise that just runs constantly right now. There's this constant stream of whatever is happening. There's a separate stream of false information also running of what's not happening. It's fascinating to me to be able to watch, and for everybody trying to be able to keep up with what's fact and fiction is a whole different challenge now than it used to be able to track all those things. So let me talk a little bit about this week. This week, the Senate just passed, the President just signed yesterday, a bill that's allowing federal aid to be able to go to Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan. It also adds new sanctions to the Iranian regime that is desperately needed. And then it also takes away the ability for TikTok to be owned by the communist Chinese. It doesn't end TikTok, it doesn't take it away, but it just says the communist country cannot own that. That has to be divested to others. So that's about to go through the courts and go through some chaos. So let me walk through a couple of those things. I was just in Israel 2.5 weeks ago. I don't get there often, but I serve on our Homeland Security Committee. I also serve on the Intelligence Committee. There's a lot of my responsibilities that also are outside the country as well. I was there over the time that was Easter time, and as funny as it was, when we first scheduled this time to be able to be there, I wasn't even thinking about all of it. I just knew we weren't in session at that point, and then later I realized, oh, I'm going to be in Jerusalem on Easter. And it just kind of sunk in. I had that same kind of response. Whoever said, wow, was like, oh, wait a minute. So actually, before we got busy that day, there's a sunrise service at the Garden Tomb that happens on Easter morning, and I had the opportunity to be able to go to that sunrise service at the Garden Tomb. And as I'm sitting there feeling exceptionally blessed, I also realized the city on the whole is empty. It was the only time I ever saw people gathered together there was that Easter morning at the Garden Tomb. Otherwise, the country is at war, and people are not out and about the same way. There aren't tourists there. There aren't other people gathered there. And if any of you have been to Jerusalem before, you know walking past the Western Wall, no matter when you walk, there's always crowds of people. It was empty. It was like walking through at COVID, and just a very bizarre feeling just to be able to see a nation that's at war on it. I was down on the very southern tip, right on the border of Gaza and Egypt. I visited some of the kibbutz that are there that were just shot up and destroyed and obliterated on October the 7th. I went to the Nova Festival site and visited with some of the families there that are still in the process of just processing They're 18-year-olds and 20-year-olds and 22-year-olds that were at an all-night music festival that early that next morning, terrorists came in and just killed as many people as they could in open field and took hostages. One of the dads I visited with was by his house at the kibbutz there, a half-mile from Gaza, which they live there and have lived there for generations in their family. And I was staying at his house, which was totally destroyed. And he pointed and he said, "That's my son's house. He's currently a hostage somewhere in Gaza right now." And just to be able to process through the reality of what's happening. I was up on the northern border with Lebanon and Syria in Golan Heights area, and realizing that we lose track of this as Americans because we talk a lot about Iran 2 weeks ago launching 330 missiles and drones at Israel, but that 330 number doesn't compare. In the last 6 months, Israel has taken on 12,000 missiles fired at them in the last 6 months. They've been fired from Yemen, from now Iran, from Syria, from Lebanon, and from Gaza. 12,000 missiles that have been fired at them. It's significant what's happening. It's painful to see what's happening in Gaza. It's painful to see what's happening in Israel. I met with some Palestinian leaders as well as meeting with Israeli senior leadership as well to be able to walk through just the reality of the day. The bill that we passed this week, the first part of it actually deals with Israel. It does humanitarian aid into Gaza. It's structured. We're trying to make sure food is getting in, not weapons are getting in. And we're also trying to be able to make sure that we're actually getting assistance actually to Israel to defend herself. When I talked to the senior Israeli leaders, they came back with the same thing each time. Much of the world is turning away from Israel at this point, saying the war is taking too long. They're turning away. And they're asking the question, is the United States still standing with us? And I said, yes, we are. We want this war to end the same as everybody else. No one wants it more than the Israelis, though. But again, what most people don't understand is they just look at Gaza, and to say that's the only issue, they've had over 4,000 missiles fired from Lebanon at them from the north, just that one location. They've had over 4,000 missiles as Hezbollah continues to be able to attack over and over and over again from the north. So there's a lot of dynamics that are there. This funding helps Israel stay in the game so they can continue to operate. It does things like their surface-to-air missile systems that can defend them from those missiles that are actually coming in. There's a lot of talk about Iran and taking out those 330 drones and missiles that came at them, but that's a long-term coalition that the United States has built for years. The missiles that came inbound from Iran, some of them were shot down by the United States, some of them were shot down by the French, some of them were shot down by the British, most of them were shot down by the Israelis, but some of them were also taken down by the Saudis, and some were taken down by the Jordanians. And most people don't realize that coalition exists there because when Iran was firing, they were firing over all of those locations. And the Saudis and the Jordanians said, no, you're not going to shoot over our territory to be able to shoot at somebody else. And so they went up and defended Israel in a way that most people were shocked by. But that's been an ongoing issue for a while to be able to process through how we actually do that. Iran is the central problem. And it's not the Iranian people, it's the Iranian regime. The Iranian people desperately want freedom. The Iranian regime is oppressive there. As you see about every 3 years an uprising in Iran, and then the Iranian regime once again squash their own people, imprison or kill them over and over and over again. Iran is the destabilizing feature in the entire region. And one of the things that was in this past bill was additional new sanctions on Iran to try to isolate in as many ways as we can that regime. There was also funding in there for Ukraine. This has been the most controversial part of the conversation about it, and it has been for now a year, is more and more Oklahomans that I talk to say, I'm tired of giving money to Ukraine. By the way, so am I. The alternative is also not good. And that's been the difficulty of the conversation, is try to figure out what to do. How do we be efficient with this? Let me start with this. There is no one flying palletfuls of money to Ukraine today. That's not what this money is. Regardless of what you see on Facebook and TikTok, if you're on that, I'd encourage you not to be on TikTok, by the way, if you are. But regardless of what you may see on social media, no one's flying planefuls of money to Ukraine today. They're not dropping it off to oligarchs in Kyiv. What's actually happening is there are weapon systems that are being built here in the United States, and those weapons are now being sent to the Ukrainians to defend themselves. of the money that's actually being spent on Ukraine, about 80% of it is actually weapon systems being built in the United States by American workers and being shipped over to them so they could defend themselves. This is similar to what we have done for decades all around the world, where we work with our allies to allow our allies to be able to defend themselves. Quick history lesson that many of you may know. Ukraine was once part of the Soviet Union. And as Reagan worked so hard to be able to break up the Soviet Union, as his feature there, I'm amazed at how many conservatives I talk to now that don't care about Reagan's work that he did to be able to break up the Soviet Union. Right now, what Putin is trying to do is to get the band back together again. He's trying to say the worst thing that happened to Russia ever was the breakup of the Soviet Union. He thinks Gorbachev made all the wrong decisions on things and wants to be able to pull it back together. That's why before this war started in Ukraine, Putin said Ukraine was once part of Russia and so was Poland. Okay, I think he means it. And the challenge is, what are we going to do about that? We've seen land wars in Europe through the 20th century and saw America say, that's over there, we're not going to get into it until we were. Best thing that we can do in a land war in Europe is to get it stopped before it spreads. The best way to stop it is not to allow Putin to just roll through a country and then pick the next country, because the next country would be Moldova. They're not a NATO ally either, but most certainly he would roll right through there and roll right into Moldova and then would be set up to be able to keep going. That's a problem. Second thing is this: 1991, the Ukrainians fought with the Russians for their own independence. They gained their independence on the streets of Kyiv. And if you've ever been into Ukraine before, they're proud to be able to show you the streets they fought in Kyiv to be able to push the Russians out. Since 1991, they've been a new country. They've got all the challenges that a new country has. They're not very old as a nation. And so they're working to be able to put together structures and all those systems that are in place. So for them in 1991 to the present, trying to be able to maintain their independence and to be free, here's the interesting dynamic that we forget sometimes. In 1994, with the breakup of the Soviet Union that happened, the Ukrainians pushing the Russians out, the Soviets had parked a lot of their nuclear missiles in Ukraine. They were the westernmost part of the Soviet Union. So a lot of the Soviet missiles that were nuclear tipped were in Ukraine. So once Ukraine gets its independence from Russia, where do those missiles go? Does Ukraine keep them? What do they do with those? Initially, they kept them and said, this is our deterrent. The United States and the UK actually negotiated with Ukraine and said, if you will surrender your nuclear weapons, if you are attacked, we will help defend you. This was an agreement we made with them in 1994. Ukraine surrendered all of their nuclear weapons. You can imagine a brand new country having nuclear tipped missiles on it, not knowing where that government would go, how significant that is in negotiations to be able to get that done. They surrendered their nuclear weapons. It's now time, because the Ukrainians have said, we gave up our nuclear weapons, our deterrence. Is America still going to be there? You know who the two leaders are right now in helping Ukraine? The UK and the United States. But we are not alone. What we just did for Ukraine, Europe just matched 2 months ago. So Europe is stepping up in a very significant way to also to be able to step up for that defense, because they understand full well Putin's not going to stop. He's going to keep going. So this was a lot of weapon systems and ways for the Ukrainians to be able to defend themselves. I have a friend of mine that lives in Odessa, not Odessa, Texas, but Odessa, Ukraine, actually. Not that there's anything wrong with Odessa, Texas, don't get me wrong, but yeah, but he lives in Odessa, Ukraine. And occasionally he texts me the number of strikes that they had the night before. His pastor is still alive, but his pastor's family was killed 3 weeks ago in one of the missile strikes. That's reality on the ground. We can either say, stinks to be you, or we can say, we gave you our word in 1994. We want to keep our blood out of that country, but we want to help you defend yourself and to be able to do what you did in 1991, pushing the Russians out, to do that again. Glad to be able to talk about that, but that's a major part. Last piece of this, well, let me give you 2 things on it. This whole issue with TikTok's been fascinating to me. I don't know how many of you use TikTok. I'm not going to have true confessions come out of this room, but I would encourage you with this statement. TikTok, from the very origin, it was owned by a company in China called ByteDance. They own the algorithm. They set the process for what actually goes out to every viewer. If you're on Facebook, Facebook sends you information based on your friends. You pick your friends, and that actually sends that. If you're on Instagram, it's set based on who you follow. Who you follow gets you information. Now, there's ads and other things that are in there, but basically, Facebook is about your friends. Instagram is about who you follow. TikTok is about the information they deem you want to see based on your age and demographics. You don't pick, they pick for you. And so their algorithm is set to be able to deliver the messages that the Communist Chinese want you to be able to see. That's how it's set up. It's not just cat videos. It's more and more news and information. So let me give you a couple of examples on this. This was a study done on some of the data coming through TikTok on this just in the past couple of months. If you're going to look at TikTok right now, 50-1, it's going to be pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas over Israel. 50-1 messaging. Are you wondering why on so many college campuses there's this rise of all these people being interested? 50-1 right now. That's what TikTok is delivering to everyone as far as their messaging on it. It's anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian on it. So there's a huge shift. How about this one? Stand with Kashmir. Does anyone know Stand with Kashmir? Kashmir is a region that China wants to be able to take and to be able to make sure that they occupy and dominate. Stand with Kashmir, that hashtag, is 20 times more popular than Taylor Swift on TikTok. Does anyone think Kashmir is 20 times more popular than Taylor Swift anywhere in the globe? I don't care. Even in Kashmir, Taylor Swift was more popular than Kashmir is. But that's the drive. That's the data that they want to send to people to be able to deliver the message. So what we just voted on was to say, not that TikTok has to be abolished, though people should stop watching it, but that's a whole different issue. It's just that the ownership, the algorithm, can't be owned by the communist government. That has to be housed somewhere else. Now, I'm fully aware that there are other social media companies that are American and international based, and they deliver the ads they want. I get that bias. It's just different when it's a communist nation that they're the one controlling what right now, brace yourself, 170 million Americans see. 170 million Americans are on TikTok. And by the way, for those that are 25 and down, the vast majority of them say they get their news from TikTok. Just let that soak in. Their news source is TikTok. So we're literally allowing the communist government to deliberately deliver the news and information they want 25 and down to be able to see on a regular basis. I think it's a long-term national security threat, and it's an issue we have to be able to face. So that will now be in the courts and will be a huge fight. One other big fight that's coming up on this is dealing with foreign intelligence. There was a bill that we passed last week dealing with how we handle foreign intelligence. Since 9/11, we learned a lesson. There were, at that time, Saudi-based terror organizations that were communicating with people inside the United States that were, at that time, currently illegally present in the United States, planning an attack on American soil. We were not tracking that communication. We learned the lesson after 9/11. Not everybody internationally is just mad at us. Some of them hate us and want to kill us. So we're tracking foreign information. By the way, when you hear the word FISA, the F in FISA stands for foreign. So it only relates to foreign threats that are out there. But there is a difference that occurs at times when there is a contact, not just a foreign entity sitting in a cave somewhere in Afghanistan planning to be able to attack us. Sometimes they reach out to an American. So let me tell you a story you haven't heard. 3 weeks ago, an ISIS group had been in long-term communication with an 18-year-old in Idaho and had been radicalizing an 18-year-old in Idaho. 3 weeks ago, the FBI swept in on a Saturday night because the next morning he was preparing to go to as many churches as he could get to on a Sunday morning and kill as many people as he could before he got killed. That was the plan, and he was in process of executing it. It was being coordinated by ISIS folks internationally, reaching to an 18-year-old here in the United States that they had radicalized, and he was fully prepared and was about to execute that plan. You've never heard that story because it was intercepted and he was arrested. And all those folks at that church or churches are still alive today. Now here's the question. Should we have intercepted that foreign communication? Or should we have said, sorry, you were talking to an American, so we're not going to listen to that? That's the challenge. There is no spying on Americans in this. And there's all this misnomer on this. It is illegal to be able to use those FISA authorities to be able to spy on Americans. And President Trump has made a lot of pretty strong statements saying he doesn't like FISA on that because it was used against him. But actually what happened was FBI agents literally lied to the FISA court. This is, by the way, not my opinion. This is the Inspector General of the FBI that said those FBI agents lied to the FISA court 10 times to be able to get an authority to be able to listen in on something. That was already illegal. We had 50 different changes in this particular bill to be able to add additional securities for Americans and American citizens, to be able to make sure we keep this as clear as we can, that when we have foreign threats, we're keenly aware of those, and that we have the opportunity to be able to stop them before they happen. But when it's domestic, all civil liberties are protected for all of us, so that we don't have to worry about somebody in government listening to our conversations. We have a constitutional protection for that. But if a terrorist is in a cave in Afghanistan, they don't have American constitutional protections. I want to know everything they're thinking. And I think that's just me serving on the Intelligence Committee. But that's also for many of us that I talk to say, I want to make sure we stop an attack before it comes at us again. We've experienced that in 9/11. We never want that to happen again. That was the vote actually last week. But probably what you heard on social media was Congress was voting to be able to spy on Americans again, which is absolutely 100% not true. But welcome to our world in the conversation. What do y'all want to talk about? I brought so much happy news. Yes, sir. Right there. Oh. There you go.
So, Senator, could you give us your thoughts on the immigration bill, for lack of a better word, that you were so heavily involved in, where that stands, what happened from your perspective? You obviously have a lot more information than we do. And what are the chances that that issue is going to come up again in the near future?
Thanks. Great question. Yesterday, we had about 5,800 people illegally cross our southern border yesterday. That would not have happened if that bill would have passed. 100% guarantee that would not have happened. So let me talk through a little history. I'll try to be quick on it because there's a lot, both history and emotion, to be able to go through this. We've seen the rise in what's happening in illegal immigration. If you go back to the time of President Obama, many of us remember when President Obama was using Fort Sill and dorms at Fort Sill to be able to keep people that were illegally crossing the border because the numbers spiked. The top spike number that happened under President Obama was 2,200 people in a day. That was the biggest number. And that was a big spike, by the way. That numbers continue to grow. President Trump had some years that were good and some years that were tough. 2019, the top spike under President Trump was 4,700 people was the top spike. Twice as high as what was happening under President Obama. Under President Biden, he literally pulled back all of the different restraints that President Trump had put in place and said, we're going to handle the border differently. The cartel said, thank you very much. And they came at us. And I would tell you from talking to the Biden folks, they were surprised. They thought they were going to manage this better, but they got completely used in this. And it just exploded. Top number under the Biden administration for illegal crossings in a day, 12,000. It's the highest number in the history of the country. Last October was the highest October ever in the history of the country. November was the highest November in the history of the country. December was the single highest month ever with the single highest day ever in the history of the country was last December. January was the highest January we've had, and now February, we're waiting on all the final numbers to come in February and March. But they'll be high. They may not be the record highest on those, but they're very, very high. This is a national security issue as well as just an immigration issue. If you go down to the border at this point and talk to folks like I do on it, I will often say to the border security folks there in the Border Patrol, tell me what's different now than what was when I was here last time. What's changing? Give me an update on it. A year and a half ago, they said to me the first time, we're getting more people from outside the Western Hemisphere than we are inside the Western Hemisphere. It's men in their 20s from China, from Russia, from Iran, from West Africa, from the Middle East. The numbers are skyrocketing. All of the nonprofit groups that work a lot with migrants coming through that area are all struggling, saying it's a lot of non-Spanish speakers. These folks scare us. I mean, it was different. It was like, we're used to dealing with people that are in difficult days. This is different what's happening on our border. There's a designation called Special Interest Aliens. That is a designation that's been around for a long time. It's when Homeland Security identifies somebody that they're not on our terror watch list, but they came through the same network, the same clan, the same family as some of the folks on our terror watch list. And we're saying, okay, we don't know who this person is. We don't have any information on them, but their travel patterns were consistent with some of the folks that we know. And so they're considered a special interest alien, by definition, a potential national security risk. It used to be a handful of people a year that would happen that way. Now we have thousands. Those folks have, almost all of them, been released in the country because we have no information on them. And so current DHS is releasing them and saying, we don't know anything bad, you're not on our terror watch list, but we're gonna track you. But that means release you. Current status right now, if someone crosses the border illegally, it's about 7 to 9 years before they get their hearing. They can travel anywhere in the country they want to be able to travel to. There is no tracking on those individuals. So that's what I know at this point, and a lot more on it, which is why last October I reached in and said, we have got to do something about this. We got to stop saying this is bad. We got to stop doing news conferences. We've got to sit down with people across the aisle and figure out how to solve this. What I jokingly say to people, but it's really true, in the Senate, it takes one person to do a press conference, but it takes 60 to make law. So it's super easy to go do a press conference. You want to do a press conference and go gripe about things? Get a microphone, go gripe about things, but you haven't solved anything. If you're going to solve something, you got to sit down with people you disagree with, like adults, and figure this out. Say, what are we going to do to be able to solve this? So I sat down with Chris Murphy, who is senator from Connecticut. The border he's most worried about is the border with New York, okay? He's from Connecticut, okay? He's not thinking about all these issues. This is not his deal all the time, but he's an influential progressive. He leads the Democrats in the appropriations for Homeland Security. He's very knowledgeable of these issues, but this is not a big issue in Connecticut. So I'm sitting down with Chris Murphy and with Kirsten Sinema, who's an independent from Arizona. This is the single biggest issue for Arizona. There is no bigger issue than that. The three of us started negotiating out how we're going to actually get to a resolution. We had commitments from Mitch McConnell and from Chuck Schumer that if the three of us were able to get to an agreement, they would put that on the floor and we would attach it to the Israel-Ukraine bill, which would make sure it actually has a chance to get heard. So that was the commitment. We worked through October, November, December. We worked through January, and it's going to sound like I need to give money actually for the happy and crappy things, but I literally, the only days we took off from negotiation during that time period was Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Day, half day on New Year's Day. That was it. 7 days a week. We either met by phone or face to face, working through hashing out the issues because they're extremely complicated. And we came up with a bill that both a progressive Democrat from Connecticut, an independent from Arizona, and a conservative from Oklahoma could all say that doesn't solve everything, but it solves a lot. And it's something the three of us could agree on. I kept the Republicans on board during this whole time, and we had a lot of conversations with other Republican senators to be able to talk about. And I would reassure them, we're not getting everything. There's a lot of things I'd like to get. We're not going to get everything on it. But we need to do something, not nothing. So we got to the point of actually presenting the bill, as most of this crowd knows, and we prepared for it. Everybody was informed, and as it was approaching, I watched my tribe back away. Two things happened. A month before the bill was going to be presented, some conservative media folks started contacting me and said, you cannot solve the border issue during a presidential election year. If you would have solved this last year, it'd have been okay, but it's a presidential election year. Do not solve it this year. This is Trump's single biggest issue. Do not take this off the table. My response to them was, he has a responsibility to campaign. I have a responsibility to govern. Okay, that's my responsibility. That's why I'm here. This is a national security risk. We've got to take this on. And their response from several of them was, I will destroy you if you try to solve this issue during the presidential election year. Literally, one of them said, you're a good guy, don't do this, because I'm going to do everything I can to destroy you. We've got to have Trump as president, and if we take this issue off the table, we may not have him as president. So we've got to have this issue. And my response to them was the same. You do what you're going to do, I've got to do what I've got to do. And we continue to be able to press forward on that. By the time we got to the actual legislation being dropped, there was so much misinformation about the bill out there, we couldn't get through all the misinformation. It was propaganda chaos on it. My favorite one was, this doesn't do anything until there's 5,000 people crossing the border a day. Why would we let 5,000 people cross the border every day? Why would we do that? And I laughed and I said, yes, why would I do that? That's not true. The way the bill was written, the very first person that crossed the border was arrested, they had a quick screening, and then they were deported, because the vast majority of people don't meet our asylum standards, and everyone knows that joke. So this changed the definition for asylum. It accelerated our screening process. It accelerated our detention, so we didn't have catch and release. It did all those things. The first person, it arrested, screened, and detained. But if we got massive numbers like 5,000, we took away due process, and we would just arrest and deport. So first person, arrest, screen, deport. 5,000th person, arrest, deport. Okay, because we don't have time to do all the screening. We don't have enough staff to be able to do that. So we have to just turn people around and to say, we've got too many people coming. We don't have time to be able to manage this. They took that to say, you do nothing for the first 5,000 people. I was like, no. The first 5,000 people will understand very, very well that they're being arrested, quickly screened, and quickly returned back to their home country. It's a pretty dramatic shift from what we have today, right now, and what's currently happening, because currently they detain them, they do a screening, and then release them for 7 years until their hearing. This would have stopped that immediately and said there is no release into the country to be able to do it. So when it got time for the actual vote, my brethren on my side walked away and said, not going to do that during a presidential election year. The House of Representatives promptly announced that they don't want to have that bill, they don't want to take it up. Their quote was, it gives Democrats too much, and so we're not going to do that. My response to the House was, the worst thing we can do is do nothing. So if you guys can do something on immigration on a bipartisan basis that can pass there, that could also pass a Senate that has to be bipartisan. So if you can pass something there and send it to us, do it. So they said, deal, we'll take that up. So for the past 2 months, they've had Israel and Ukraine over on their house while they've been trying to negotiate a border peace. At the end of it, they could not get to a decision of anything bipartisan over there. They couldn't pass anything on immigration, and they just sent it back to us without it, which meant the worst case scenario, we did nothing. So now what? I met this past week with Ali Mayorkas again. We still have a problem sitting in front of us. And I've got to figure out some way we can get the administration to start doing their job, because there are things this administration can do to be able to significantly turn down the numbers. My statement to Mayorkas is, if you'll just enforce the border the same way Obama did, this would be better. Okay, much less the way Trump did. Just do it the same way Obama did. This will be a whole lot better. And so far, this administration has been unwilling to do that. Literally, they've been unwilling to do it. Why? They are so concerned. Right now, their presidential politics, they're very worried about the activist left progressives that feel like an open border is appropriate. They will flat out tell me it's mean. These are the poorest of the poor coming from all over the world. We should let them in. And my statement is, I am all for legal immigration. I have no hesitation on legal immigration. I just don't want unchecked, unvetted, illegal immigration. And that's what we have right now. We have 3 million people in all likelihood this year that will come in, and the only vetting that they will get is, are you on the terror watch list? That's it. We're not checking the criminal history of the country they're coming from. We have no idea where they're headed. We have no idea their intentions. Many of them are coming to connect with family that are here, but some of them are not. And we just don't know who's who in that process. And to me, that's too big of a risk. So I'm very supportive of legal immigration. I'm very, very opposed to illegal immigration. And the White House is very concerned about the progressives not showing up for the election, and they don't want to tick them off. So this is literally caught up on presidential politics on both sides of the aisle right now. The result is America is being left vulnerable. You're welcome. Okay, but that's one we're working on. I've taken a lot of arrows. One of my favorite comments is one of my colleagues, I was drinking a glass of water and we were saying and talking, and he stopped and looked at me and goes, I fully expected when you took a drink there'd be water shoot out from every direction. And I said, yeah, not wrong on this, because I've had arrows from every direction that have come at me through this. I would still say, not a fun experience, but even when we voted for the Israel funding and the Ukraine funding Tuesday night late, I had colleagues come up to me on the floor from my side of the aisle and said, in hindsight, we should have had your bill on this, because nothing's changed on immigration, and I don't know how we're going to get any change. I've had members of the press just this past week that came up to me and said, Republicans will never get that deal again. We'll never get that deal again. Because the immigration piece I had no amnesty in it at all. There was no amnesty. And it's the first time in decades there's been a border security bill negotiated with no amnesty piece in it. There's no amnesty in it at all. We were negotiating how we're going to secure the border. That was the negotiation piece. But yeah, if we'd have got it done, I guess, in November or December, maybe we could have passed it. But once the calendar tipped, it flew apart on both sides. So that was a way long answer. I appreciate your question. I appreciate your prayers. Let's not give up on the nation. We still keep working on things. This is still a problem that's got to be solved. And what's interesting is when I talk to Democrats or Republicans or independents, everybody sees it as a problem. We may disagree on the solution. Everybody sees it as a problem. So my focus is we all see it as a problem. Let's actually figure out how to solve it. We're Americans. Let's sit down with people we disagree with, treat them with respect, and figure out how to solve this. Yeah. I know we're running out of time, I know, but sorry because I've talked too long on it. Third base side, want to ask a question? Since I gave the first base side so much time. Okay. It's 1 o'clock. I don't need to take anything at all. Let me just say this. Go ahead. Somebody have a quick something? Okay. Let me say this because it's 1 o'clock. Y'all got to get back to work and earn money to pay taxes and do all those things, okay? Thanks for the invitation, for being patient. Where's Kevin? Right there. Thank you for your patience. Glad to be able to come back anytime, really to be able to be in the dialogue and the conversation. Anybody that can treat each other with respect and do the four-way test when we disagree in a room is a good model to be able to put out there. I have to tell you, one of the obligations that I feel is we're very divided as a nation and we're very angry. Now, we're in some ways, we're angry for a reason. There's an out-of-control spiraling debt. There's all kinds of political dysfunction. There's border issues that are happening. There's all kinds of things that are out there. But trying to out-anger somebody doesn't make it better. It just doesn't. You want to do Jesus terms on this, okay? Love overcomes, not hatred on this. Jesus was pretty clear when he said in Matthew 5, you know, you've heard that it was said, love your neighbor, hate your enemy, but that's not what I say. What I say is love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. It's a pretty radical concept in that. But my challenge to us as Oklahomans, and especially for people of faith, we should actually live our faith. We should actually demonstrate those principles in the public or private arena. There is no footnote on Matthew 5 that says, unless you're in politics, then get them, okay? That's just not there. It is a disciplined way to be able to engage with people that you disagree with and to be able to say, okay, you and I disagree on something, let's figure this out. What our nation needs right now is more folks like people in this room that are setting the example, that are working to be able to resolve problems rather than just destroy people that disagree with you. My fellow American is not my enemy. They're just not. We disagree on stuff. I've got friends that are in the Senate on the other side of the aisle. They vote wrong every day. Every day they vote wrong. But that's my fellow American, and we disagree on something. We've got to sit down and figure out how to be able to work this out. And so for me, I'm going to treat them with respect. I'm going to demand they do the same. But I'm going to sit down with people and try to resolve it. Let's do that as a people. Let's set that example. We need that in our state. We need that in our nation right now to be able to set that tone. I get the privilege of traveling around the world representing us. Everybody in the world still wants to be us. But everybody in the world is also confused by us right now. I'm telling you, everywhere I travel right now, I get at some point a private question from some government leader in some other country where they pull me aside and say, I don't recognize America anymore. That's bad for the world, okay? But it also should be a wake-up call for us to say, let's be who we're supposed to be, who constitutionally we were set up to be, a nation that has wide opinions, but we resolve our issues, and we're working to be a more perfect union as we have for a couple of centuries plus now. Never perfect, but working to be a more perfect union all the time. So my challenge to us is, let's live our values and our principles. Fair enough? Thanks, y'all.